Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling scholarly data mining.
Right.
Imagine taking all those research papers, author info, citations, conferences, journals,
Yeah.
everything online, and using data analysis to find the real nuggets.
Exactly. And we're absolutely swimming in it, this vast sea of academic work. I mean, over 114 million documents online back in 2014.
Wow.
And it's just exploded since then, growing by, what, tens of thousands every single day?
That's just a huge amount of information.
It is. And scholarly data mining, well, it gives us a way to try and make sense of it all.
So for you, the learner, our mission today is really to pull out the key ways this is actually being used. We've gone through a systematic review of over 90 research articles to bring you the highlights.
And you should get ready for some maybe surprising insights about how we can now study science itself using these data-driven methods.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. It seems like it moves beyond just finding one study here or there.
Oh, definitely. Scholarly data mining helps us see the connections, between different bits of knowledge, spot trends as they're just starting to emerge.
And maybe even get a sense of which research might eventually have the biggest impact.
Exactly. It's sort of like having a map of the entire scientific world and being able to see how everything fits together.
Okay, let's get into it then. This review we looked at, it identified 5 main areas where scholarly data mining is really making waves.
Right.
We're going to dive into each one. Citation analysis, then document analysis, conference analysis, trend analysis, and finally, literature analysis, which seems to sort of tie it all together.
Sounds good.
Let's start with analyzing citations. How does that work?
Okay, citation analysis. Very simply, it looks at citations, those references you see in academic papers. But they aren't just like afterthoughts. They're really vital clues about a piece of work's influence and how ideas travel through the scholarly world.
So it's about tracking who cites whom and how often.
Pretty much, yeah. We look at who cites whom and how often their work gets referenced.
Right. So the review mentions citation and co-citation analysis. Tell us a bit more about that distinction.
Sure. At its core, citation analysis deals with these things called citation networks.
Okay.
Think of it like a massive web. Each researcher, each paper, they're like nodes in the network.
Got it.
And every time someone references another's work, a link or an edge is drawn between them. By analyzing these huge interconnected webs, we can start to see who the key players are and how ideas are spreading.
So you can literally visualize the conversations happening within science.
Precisely.
What?
And we often start with count-based citation analysis. That's pretty straightforward, right?
Just counting citations.
Yeah, just counting how many times a paper has been cited to get a quantitative measure, a basic idea of its impact.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The field is moving much more towards content-based citation analysis. CCA, they call it.
Content-based. So it's not just how many times you're cited, but the context.
Yeah.
Why they cited you.
Exactly. CCA digs into the syntactic level, like where does the citation appear in the citing paper? Section, paragraph. And the semantic level, what's the actual reason for the citation? Is it supporting evidence? A counterargument? Building on the work.
Right.
And this often involves using natural language processing, NLP, to understand the text around the citation itself.
That sounds challenging, though, figuring out which bit of text matters most.
It is. Pinpointing the most informative context and which parts of the citing paper really hold the key information.
Yeah.
That's a big challenge. But this shift, from just counting to understanding why,
Yeah.
it can reveal these hidden intellectual debts or maybe even disagreements that the traditional metrics would just totally miss. It gives a much, much richer picture of scientific influence.
That makes total sense. I mean, you could be cited because someone is building directly on your breakthrough.
Right.
But you could also be cited if they're arguing against you or presenting a totally different approach.
Exactly right. And then related to that, we have co-citation analysis.
Okay.
This looks at how often 2 different papers, or maybe 2 different researchers, are cited together by other works.
Ah, so it's about the pairing.
Yes. It helps us understand the intellectual relationships between them. If lots of people cite paper A and paper B together, it suggests those 2 papers are seen as related in some important way.
How does that work in practice? What does it tell us?
Well, there's author co-citation analysis. That looks at how similar different authors seem to be based on the context, the reasons why their work gets jointly cited.
Okay.
And then there's document co-citation analysis. This is really useful for identifying clusters of related literature.
Like finding groups of papers on a similar topic.
Exactly. and even identifying whole scholarly communities that you might not easily spot with just regular keyword searches. And this can be really valuable for spotting connections between different fields, potentially sparking new interdisciplinary research.
You mentioned an example in the review, something about systems thinking literature.
Yeah, that's right. Researchers used these document co-citation networks, and they uncovered patterns in really influential papers, patterns that cut across various disciplines, all within this broad area of systems thinking.
So it helps reveal this sort of underlying intellectual structure of a field.
That's a great way to put it. Both author and document co-citation analysis give us these really powerful tools for mapping out and understanding the academic landscape.
Okay, so stepping back a bit, what are some of the real-world things you can actually do with all this citation and co-citation information? What are the applications?
Oh, the review points to a lot of them. Things like figuring out when different authors happen to share the same name.
Ah, the name ambiguity problem.
Exactly. Author name disambiguation. Also, classifying different research topics automatically, even trying to predict which research projects might turn out to be, scientifically successful down the line.
Really? Predicting success?
Well, predicting potential, perhaps. It can also help spot sleeping beauties.
Sleeping beauties?
Yeah. Papers that don't get much attention when they're first published, but then maybe years later, they suddenly become highly influential.
Huh. Why is finding those important?
Well, identifying those initially overlooked papers, it kind of challenges our traditional ideas about impact, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
It suggests that long-term significance isn't always obvious right away. It might prompt us to reevaluate how we assess, say, early-stage research.
Interesting. Wow.
Plus, you can track how knowledge flows between different areas of study and analyze research trends over time using citation patterns.
That's a really powerful set of tools just for understanding how science actually progresses.
Absolutely.
Now, the review also touched on something called readership analysis, using Mendeley reader counts. What's the idea there?
Right, Mendeley. So readership analysis uses the number of people who save a particular article to their personal Mendeley library.
Like bookmarking it.
Exactly. It's seen as a potential early signal of how impactful that research might be. The thinking is, researchers might save an article because it's relevant to their work, maybe even before they get around to formally citing it in their own papers.
And do these saves, these reader counts, actually tell us anything about future citations? Is there a link?
Generally, yes. Several studies have found a positive link, a correlation between Mendeley reader counts and then the citation numbers that come later.
Great.
The idea is that these saves can appear, sometimes months or even years before the formal citations start racking up.
So it's an early indicator?
Potentially, yes. However, it's not always straightforward. There was a study mentioned in Computer Science and Engineering.
Yeah.
It found that while there was a moderate connection for both journal articles and conference papers in computer science, the connection was actually weaker for engineering conference papers.
Why the difference?
Well, it suggests that maybe how researchers in different fields discover information and how much they value different types of publications, like conference papers versus journals, might vary quite a bit. Disciplinary differences.
Interesting. Yeah, those field-specific patterns seem important. Okay, next up in the review was bibliometrics analysis. That sounds even broader.
It is, yeah. Bibliometrics uses statistical analysis to examine the sort of overall patterns of scientific output within a field or across fields. It goes beyond just counting citations.
Oh, so what else does it look at?
Well, for example, researchers have used time series analysis on bibliometric data. They use it to compare how scientific production, the rate of publishing, has evolved in different countries over decades.
Okay.
And they can try to see how major social, political, or economic events might have influenced that output.
So you can actually see the impact of, world events on the pace of scientific discovery.
That's exactly. Or funding changes, policy shifts, things like that. Bibliometrics also involves statistically analyzing the relationships between authors, journals, institutions, countries.
Wow.
And even the keywords that appear frequently in publications.
Keywords, too.
Yeah, there's a study mentioned on Graphian literature.
I can't remember seeing that.
Right. It showed how the clusters of keywords used in applied patents related to graphene shifted over time. That reflected the increasing sort of real-world applications of the material.
So it's a much wider view than just looking at who cites whom.
Definitely.
It includes things like the specific language being used and the popularity of certain keywords or topics.
Precisely. Bibliometrics includes looking at the actual language, developing standardized sets of terms, they call them thesauri, tracking how often articles are accessed or downloaded, and analyzing those crucial keywords.
Okay.
It's all about understanding the quantitative side of science as this huge system of communication. There's even a specific subfield called scientometrics that focuses solely on these quantitative aspects, kind of the science of science.
Got it. That makes sense. And finally, in this whole citation analysis cluster, we have altmetrics. That's been getting a lot of buzz lately, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. Altmetrics analysis looks at the activities surrounding scholarly work, but on online social media and other sort of non-traditional online platforms.
Like Twitter, blogs, news mentions.
Exactly. Mentions in news articles, blog posts, Twitter activity. How many times an article is viewed or downloaded from certain sites.
Okay.
Even things like how many people are watching or starring a related software project over on GitHub.
So it's trying to capture how research is being discussed and maybe used beyond the traditional academic sphere.
That's the idea. It's seen as a way to measure how research is being disseminated more broadly and maybe its potential influence outside of just academic citations.
Does it work? Does it correlate with citations?
Sometimes. Some studies, for instance in ecology journals, they found a decent connection between certain altmetrics and later citation-based metrics. So maybe an early signal again.
But I sense a but.
Well, yeah, it's important to be cautious. Another study, this one looking specifically at Twitter data, found that simply counting the number of mentions,
Just the raw count.
right,
Yeah.
without analyzing what those tweets actually said about the paper, well, that could lead to pretty inaccurate conclusions about its impact.
That makes sense. A tweet could be highly critical, right?
Yeah.
Not exactly a sign of positive impact.
Precisely. So context matters there too, not just the numbers.
Okay, wow, that was a really thorough look at citation analysis in all its forms. Let's move on now to the second major area, document analysis. This sounds like we're actually looking inside the research papers themselves.
You've got it. Document analysis examines different characteristics within the scholarly documents. Things like who the author is, the actual content of the paper, of course, and how the document is structured. And it does this for a variety of uses.
Okay, let's start with authorship analysis. How can data mining help us figure out or confirm who actually wrote something?
Well, one approach uses what they call content agnostic and stylometric features.
Content agnostic, meaning it ignores the topic.
Yeah, exactly. It looks instead at the unique patterns in someone's writing style, their stylistic fingerprint, if you will.
Like sentence length, word choice, that sort of thing.
That's right. Things like average sentence length, how often they use certain types of words or grammatical structures, things that can be surprisingly consistent for an author, even when they write about different topics.
Huh.
There were even pilot studies mentioned using PubMed data, where they looked at how well humans could distinguish authorship just by style in documents that were actually very similar in topic.
Interesting comparison. Any other methods?
Yeah, another method uses citation data combined with information about research topics, sometimes gathered from the community, like crowdsourced tags, to detect those cases where different authors unfortunately have the same name. That ambiguity problem again. One system mentioned, Scholarometer, apparently achieved pretty good accuracy, around 75%, using this kind of heuristic approach.
So it's almost like forensic linguistics, but for academic papers.
In a way, yes. Then we have document structure analysis. What can we learn from just how a research paper is organized?
Like the sections. Intro, methods, results.
Exactly. Identifying that functional structure.
Yeah.
Which part is the introduction, which describes the methods, the results, the conclusion?
How's that done automatically?
It can be done by looking at section headings, obviously, but also by analyzing the content within those sections, or even looking for patterns at the level of individual paragraphs.
Okay.
One study developed a novel clustering algorithm specifically for computer science papers. It grouped parts of the papers together to automatically identify this structure.
And why is that useful?
Well, the researchers found it actually improved how well you could search for academic papers, and also how accurately you could extract relevant keywords from them.
Ah, that would be really helpful, just for quickly understanding the layout and main points of a paper you haven't read before.
Absolutely. Another area here is identifying the specific problems that a paper is trying to address, and the solutions or methods it proposes.
How can a computer tell the difference?
Researchers have built automatic systems, classifiers, that can distinguish between sentences or paragraphs describing a scientific problem versus those presenting a potential solution.
How accurate are they?
They can get up to around 80% accuracy, using things like the grammatical structure of sentences, word embeddings to capture meaning, and various machine learning algorithms. They tested this on a large collection of papers from computational linguistics.
That could really speed up literature reviews, couldn't it? If you could just pull out the problems and solutions.
Definitely. And document structure analysis isn't just for published papers. It also extends to looking at things like research proposals.
Grant proposals.
Exactly. Analyzing things like the patterns of citations within the proposal, or even how clearly the proposal is written, to see if that predicts whether it will actually be successful in getting funding.
Does clarity matter?
Apparently, yes. One study found that the clarity of the writing in NIH R01 proposals was actually a significant predictor of whether they got funded.
Wow. Good writing pays off.
Seems so. And just briefly, there's even research looking at analyzing slide presentations from conferences, breaking them down into sort of discrete knowledge units to represent the scientific information being conveyed.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, now what about the actual words, the content itself, inside these documents? That falls under content analysis, right?
Yes, exactly. Content analysis can be quite broad. For instance, keyword analysis. That helps us understand similarities and differences between research areas just by examining the relationships between the keywords used in, say, a collection of PhD theses. Or it could be much more detailed, looking at the full textual content of the research papers.
And what can we do by analyzing the text itself in that kind of detail?
Oh, lots of things. Topic classification, for example. Using machine learning to automatically categorize papers based not just on their text, but also using the papers they cite as additional information.
Right. Combining text and citations.
Yeah. There's also work on automatically identifying the specific research hypotheses being tested in papers, maybe just from the abstracts.
That'd be useful.
And even automatically extracting the algorithms described within scientific text. Using sort of hybrid machine learning approaches. There was a system mentioned called Algorithm Seer, aiming to do that.
So we're essentially teaching computers to read and understand the core scientific elements within the papers.
Precisely. And that capability naturally leads us to scientific recommendation systems.
Systems to help researchers find relevant stuff.
Exactly. Systems designed to help researchers discover relevant new work they might otherwise miss. This includes recommending specific papers, or sometimes even suggesting entire research topics that might be relevant based on your past work or interests.
How do they work?
Often by analyzing citation networks combined with the text of publications. And there are also systems being developed specifically to recommend suitable peer reviewers for a submitted paper.
Oh, that's a big one. Peer review matching.
Yeah, framing it as a classification problem. Trying to match the paper's keywords and topic to the research interests and expertise of potential reviewers, sometimes using quite sophisticated text similarity measures.
That would definitely make the whole peer review process potentially more efficient and effective.
That's the hope. And finally, within this document analysis category, we have scientific text summarization.
Oh, definitely needed.
Absolutely. With the sheer volume of research being published, being able to quickly grasp the key findings of a paper is incredibly important.
So how are they tackling that?
Researchers are exploring various ways. Generating summaries of the main topics covered by a whole set of relevant documents, maybe to create a topic survey. Others are creating visual summaries based on citation relationships, which papers cite which key parts of a target paper, and using advanced language models like the ones powering chatbots now to summarize the overall impact of a publication based on how it's been discussed and cited by others.
Summarizing impact, not just content.
Exactly. And they're even working on summarizing specific structured parts of a paper, like automatically generating descriptions for tables of data or summarizing the steps in a described algorithm.
Talk about potential solutions for information overload. That's really promising. Okay, so we've explored analyzing citations and analyzing the documents themselves. Now let's turn our attention to conference analysis. What can we learn from studying academic conferences as entities?
Right. Conference analysis focuses on understanding the conferences themselves, the events, the venues for sharing research.
What sort of understanding?
Well, it includes things like categorizing conferences based on the specific research areas they cover, and also figuring out how closely related different conferences are to each other.
Why is relatedness important?
Well, one study mentioned looked at computer science conferences using data from DBLP, a big bibliography database. They evaluated different ways of measuring how related conferences are, and they found that these computed relatedness measures lined up pretty well with established rankings of conference quality, like the core rankings.
So it helps validate the measures.
Exactly. But beyond just ranking, analyzing conference programs, maybe the papers presented, the attendees.
Yeah.
This can reveal emerging subfields or hot topics before they become really prominent in journal publications.
Like an early warning system for trends.
Sort of, yeah. It's like getting an early peek at the cutting edge of research and maybe identifying the key communities or individuals driving those new advancements.
So this kind of analysis can help you figure out which conferences are, the most important or prestigious in a particular field.
Exactly that. And also understand which conferences tend to focus on similar research areas.
That seems really valuable for researchers.
Oh, definitely. When they're deciding where to submit their latest work or which conferences they should attend to network with the right people in their specific niche, makes those decisions more data-driven.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, let's shift gears again and talk about trend analysis. This sounds really crucial for understanding how research fields change over time.
It is, absolutely. Trend analysis aims to uncover the hidden patterns, the directions in which research is moving within this massive amount of scholarly data.
Why is that so important?
Well, it's particularly important for researchers who are maybe new to a field. It helps them get up to speed, understand how the area is developing, where it came from, and maybe identify potential gaps where new research is needed, the hot areas or the overlooked ones.
Okay, so how do researchers actually identify these emerging trends from the data? What are the methods?
The review, we look at groups, the methods, into basically three main categories. First, there are bibliometrics-based approaches. These use citation counts and network analysis, things we talked about earlier, to spot trends. For example, researchers have used certain statistical models, like hidden Markov models, on patent citations to understand how knowledge is transferred and evolves over time in technology areas.
Right.
And document co-citation analysis, which we also discussed, has been used to track how research topics evolve within a specific field, like information science, by seeing which papers get cited together over time.
So following the citation links again, but looking for temporal patterns to see where a field might be going next.
Precisely. The second category uses content-based approaches.
Analyzing the words inside the papers.
Exactly. Analyzing the actual text, especially the key words that authors use.
What techniques are used there?
Things like topic modeling are pretty common. They're used to study how the main themes or topics of research within a field change over time by looking at word co-occurrence patterns.
Okay.
And more recently, techniques like word embeddings, which capture word meanings in a mathematical space, are being used.
What for?
To track how the meaning of specific scientific terms changes over time, and also how the relationships between different keywords evolve.
So not just which words are popular, but how their meaning itself might shift within the community. That's fascinating.
It is, isn't it? One study, for instance, analyzed a huge collection of machine learning publications to see exactly that, how the meaning of key terms in ML has shifted as the field grew and changed.
Wow. Okay, so bibliometrics-based, content-based. What's the third category?
The third is hybrid approaches. These, as the name suggests, combine both citation data and content analysis, trying to get the best of both worlds.
Makes sense. Examples?
Yep. These might involve looking at both grant proposals and the resulting publications to see how funded ideas translate into research trends, or using visual tools called timeline knowledge maps, which integrate content and citation info to show evolution, or taking advantage of really large-scale databases like the Microsoft Academic Graph, which contains info on papers, authors, citations, affiliations, and more, to track research trends and the complex relationships between different areas of study on a massive scale.
So by using these different lenses, looking at who's citing whom and what they're actually saying in the papers, you can get a much clearer, more robust picture of how research fields are actually evolving.
Exactly. It gives you a more multifaceted view of the dynamics.
Okay, great. Finally, we arrive at the last category mentioned in the review, literature analysis. This sounds like it takes the broadest perspective of all.
You're right. It generally does. Literature analysis tends to look at multiple aspects of the scholarly world simultaneously.
Like what?
The papers themselves, the authors who wrote them, the citations between them, institutional affiliations, keywords, topics, all the different relationships and entities involved.
And what's the main goal here? Is it different from the others?
Well, often the primary goal here is focused on developing better tools and systems that help all of us, researchers, funders, librarians, explore this incredibly complex landscape of scholarly data more effectively.
Can you give some examples of these tools or systems?
Sure. Think of comprehensive academic search engines like RNetMiner, which later became Amainer, or CiteSeerX.
I've heard of CiteSeerX.
Right. These go way beyond simple keyword searching. They use sophisticated data mining techniques to provide more intelligent ways to find relevant papers, see citation contexts, find expert authors, and understand the research landscape.
So they're more than just like advanced search engines. They're doing analysis behind the scenes.
Exactly. They leverage many of the techniques we've been discussing, citation analysis, content analysis, to uncover hidden links and patterns within the vast amount of academic information they index.
What else falls under literature analysis?
It also involves creating things like visual study maps or topic maps. These are generated by analyzing the topics discussed in different papers, maybe using topic modeling again, to help visualize the fundamental ideas within a specific field and how they relate.
Like a concept map for a whole research area?
Kind of, yeah. And visualization tools are really important here in general. Tools designed specifically to help us see things like the social networks of researchers.
Who collaborates with whom?
Exactly. Or identifying distinct research communities within a larger field and understanding patterns of collaboration, maybe between institutions or countries. Systems like Action Science Explorer, ASE, and Rexplore were mentioned as examples of these kinds of exploratory visualization tools.
So it's really about building a kind of interactive visual representation of the entire body or large parts of academic knowledge and the people creating it.
Precisely. These tools aim to empower researchers and others to navigate and understand the sheer scale and interconnectedness of scholarly work in new and hopefully really powerful ways.
Wow, okay. We have covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive. It's really quite amazing what's possible. So to try and bring it all together, what are the main things that scholarly data mining allows us to do? What are the key takeaways?
Well, I think it boils down to a few key capabilities. It gives us the power to understand the real impact and influence of research, often beyond simple counts. It helps reveal the underlying structures, the connections within scientific knowledge itself.
Right.
It definitely aids us in discovering relevant information much more effectively in this ocean of publications. And, maybe most excitingly, it allows us to start analyzing and even predicting the future directions of research fields.
So for you, the learner, we really hope this has provided a quick but also thorough understanding of this rapidly developing field. It's kind of like having a shortcut, isn't it?
Yeah.
A shortcut to understanding not just the specific findings of science, but the very processes of scientific discovery, how knowledge is generated, and how it spreads and evolves.
And maybe the really thought-provoking thing to consider, the sort of this final takeaway is this. As this study of science itself becomes increasingly driven by data, as we get better at building these maps and prediction models, how might this fundamentally reshape the way research is actually conducted in the future? How might it change how projects get funded or how scientific contributions are evaluated?
That's a big question.
It is. It raises really important questions about the long-term impact of these powerful analytical tools on the whole future of knowledge creation and dissemination. Something to definitely keep thinking about.